Hello and welcome to the Sports Ethos DFS Today podcast. I am your host, Micah Konchar, joined by none other than David Menkoff. This is Dave's day. It's a wonderful Friday. Subbing in here for Santino. Guy needed a day off, covered for me on Tuesday, so we switched a little bit of shifts. So you're not used to hearing my voice on a Friday, but Dave, I am glad to be here with you to break down this 9-gamer that we have on our hands. It's January 14th. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. As much as I'm saddened that Santino isn't joining me, I'm very excited to hop on one of these Friday night slates with you. It's been a few months, and I'm excited to jump into a juicy 9-gamer we have for everyone tonight.
You don't have to say you're sad that he's not here, man. You can speak the truth. I won't tell him. Speak the truth. No, in all seriousness, I'm glad to be here, man. These are some of the best slates. They're right in the middle of the road. It's not like it's 12. It's not like it's 5. There's going to be some differentiation going on a 9-gamer. And a lot of good options. I think a lot of good spots. We have a lot of the news, but we're still going to get, obviously, the ones that pop up last minute and probably some stuff that will even pop up while we're on the show. But before we jump into anything, quick shout out to Thrive Fantasy, guys. Come prop up with us over there. If you haven't checked it out, what are you waiting for? Thrive Fantasy is the leading daily fantasy sports and esports app for players prop. With Thrive, you eliminate countless hours of research and focus only on top-tier athletes that have the biggest impact on the game. Choose 10 of 20 available player props to build your lineup. Each prop is assigned a fantasy value for both the over and under based on how likely it is to hit. Hit the most props, rack up the most points, and win a share of that prize pool. So Thrive has over $50,000 in guaranteed prizes weekly for the NBA and has awarded over $6 million so far. Use promo code ETHOS, ETHOS, when you sign up, and you receive a 100%. And Dave, the key word here is instant first deposit match on up to $100. So it's not like some other sites where sometimes you have to drag it on, you play a couple, then they deposit another $1 or $2 in there. It's a 100% instant first deposit match on up to $100 with promo code ETHOS. You can find the Thrive Fantasy in your App Store, Play Store, or just visit their website at www.thrivefantasy.com. Sign up and come prop today. All right, my friend. The first game on the docket, Orlando Magic traveling to Charlotte. They are taking on the Hornets in this one. For the Hornets, Vernon Carey, Kai Jones, Kelly Oubre Jr. all rolled out. And then for the Magic, Mo Bamba upgraded to questionable. Wendell Carter Jr., Markelle Fultz, Michael Carter-Williams, Jonathan Isaac, Etuan Moore all ruled out. I will pass it over to you. Talk to me about this Magic squad and who you're interested in.
Yeah, the Magic are interesting. They're definitely a team that's going up against the Hornets. This game should be somewhat high-paced. I actually like a few guys on the Magic side of the ball, starting with Cole Anthony, 7,800, coming off a nice monster effort in his last game against the Wizards. I love Cole Anthony here. I think he's in a perfect spot against the Hornets. Should continue to ramp up and continue to put up monster fantasy numbers. Under 8K in salary is also a nice little bonus for everyone listening. But I definitely like him. He's my favorite play. And then also, I'm going to have some shares of Franz Wagner as well. We still don't have news on Mo Bamba and Wendell Carter. If they're out, fire ups for Franz Wagner under 6K, 5,900. Coming off almost a near triple-double in the last one against the Wizards. He's going to be asked for a little more playmaking ability. So I like those two on the Magic side. And that's pretty much it. We could go Robin Lopez again if we get news that Mo Bamba and Wendell Carter are out. Coming off a 36-point fantasy effort at 4,400, he should be a nice value play as well. But we definitely want to hear the news about both of the young big men. If they're confirmed out, fire up some Robin Lopez as well. So those are the three guys I'm looking at on the Magic side of the ball. Who are you looking at?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think Wendell Carter, let me double check this injury report. I believe he's already been ruled out. So I think we have the news. Wendell Carter has been ruled out. It's Mo Bamba, but that's still going to impact, obviously, if whether or not we're targeting Robin Lopez. Now, if both these guys are out, I think Robin Lopez, Chuma Okeke, both those guys have come into immediate play. I mean, this is an up-tempo spot for the Magic. Charlotte plays at an extremely fast pace. We know that they give up a ton of points. They give up a ton of three-pointers. You'll hear me say that night in and night out. I love targeting teams. Two of my favorite teams to target are on this slate. I like targeting teams going against Charlotte. I like targeting teams going against Houston. There's no secret involved with those two teams that they're both pretty bad on defense. They play at high paces. So it's just more shot attempts, more rebounds, more steals, more everything opportunity for the teams going against those guys. So, yeah, sign me up. I'm good with looking at those two guys if they both sit. If we see that Mo Bamba's playing at 5,800, I think that he's certainly in play. We saw the last game that he started. He came out, put up a good effort. And as long as he's playing high 20s, he has that ceiling. He's not going to be my favorite center play on the slate if he does play, but it's something that we need to monitor. I think you mentioned Franz, absolutely on board with Franz. It's just the kid has such a consistent floor, always has the ceiling. It's a picture perfect matchup for him. These two teams have actually already played twice this season. He's put up about 30 DK points in those, and I'd say that's probably more of a floor for him. Cole Anthony at 7,800. He's certainly in play. There's a lot of point guards that we will talk about, but again, anytime you see a team facing the Charlotte Hornets, you could pretty much target everybody. I think it's also worth mentioning that Jalen Suggs is ready to return in this one. So it's going to take a little guard minutes away. I don't think it's really going to come from Cole Anthony necessarily, more or less come from guys like Gary Harris, RJ Hampton. But it's also something that we have to monitor and mention. Same thing goes for Terrence Ross, who's also been playing plus 30 minutes over the past 3 games. May see that go down a tick. But I would say when it's all said and done, based on the news that we have now, let's say Mo Bamba plays, right? I'll probably be looking at Franz. I'll be looking at a little bit of Terrence Ross. I'm not going to Jalen Suggs. If we get word that he starts, I'll have interest. But there's a decent chance they just move Franz over to the 4. They might just end up starting Suggs right off the rip, playing Gary Harris at the 3. So it's the first game of the night. We'll have that news. If they both sit, Robin Lopez, Okeke, Franz would be my top options I'd be looking at. On the Hornets side of the ball, to run it back, I guess, if you're going to be playing some of these Magic players, you're going to want to run it back with somebody. LaMelo Ball, still criminally underpriced. He's only 8,900. This dude should be well over 9K, and I get it. A couple of these games have been down for him. I mean, he had a couple 45-point games against Milwaukee and against Detroit. Didn't have the best average against his team, but mostly due to blowouts. He's averaging 29 points in 25 minutes, and that's DK points. This dude plays 30 plus. We're probably looking at least 40. He always has that upside for 50 or 60. Absolutely in play. Has dual eligibility at point guard and shooting guard. Normally, when I see that there's a big discrepancy between him and Rozier, I like to make Rozier the pivot. I don't like this matchup as much as I normally would for him. So I'll probably leave Rozier out of the player pool. Same thing with Hayward. It's probably just primarily going to be a little bit of LaMelo Ball. I think everybody else is priced pretty appropriately, where I just don't need to have any interest.
Yeah, the Hornets are interesting. I'm with you 100% on LaMelo Ball. We haven't seen a LaMelo Ball type of signature performance in some time. We haven't seen a triple-double, for that matter, in a couple of weeks now for LaMelo. So I think he's long overdue. This is a perfect spot for him. Price under 9K. We're not going to get him under 9K very much this season, so we got to take advantage. I love LaMelo Ball here to run it back on some of the Magic players I touched on. And then also Gordon Hayward coming off a monster effort against the Sixers. 6,900 is still a pretty good price tag. It sounds like he's getting more and more comfortable in this offense. Let's see if he can run it back after that great performance against the Sixers. Can he do it again against the Magic? This is a perfect spot for him to step it up as well. I'm also looking at guys like PJ Washington, potentially at 4,700. A guy that, again, didn't play much against the Sixers, but this game has blowout potential if the Hornets get hot from the field. And then we could expect some PJ Washington minutes, but I'm definitely going to looking at him more for tournaments versus cash game builds from that matter. And then obviously Miles Bridges 8K, a little bit too pricey for me in this type of matchup. I'd much rather go Gordon Hayward if we're going to go the wing position on the Hornets side. So for me, it's really going to be LaMelo Ball, Gordon Hayward, and then sprinkle in some PJ Washington if we get news that Mo Bamba and Wendell Carter are out. I like PJ Washington a little bit more on the Hornets side of the ball.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention the spread and game total. It is a 10.5 point spread being favored towards Charlotte. 225 game total, the second highest game total that we have available. Only to, guess who? The Rockets game that we'll get to later on tonight. But next game, Raptors traveling to Detroit, taking on the Pistons in this one. For the injury report, the Pistons, Jeremy Grant, Frank Jackson, Isaiah Livers, Kelly Olynyk, Chris Smith, all rolled out. And then for the Raptors, Goran Dragic, David Johnson, Isaac Bonga, all ruled out. Scottie Barnes and Gary Trent Jr. are both questionable. Scottie dealing with some knee soreness. Gary Trent with that left ankle. I'd be surprised if Trent plays. Keep your eye on it. I think Scottie has a better chance of playing. But if both these guys sit, I think we can go right back to the well with a guy like Chris Boucher. He started in that last one. There's a decent chance that they could have went a little smaller, played Svi, just moved Siakam up to the 5. They opted to go big, which worked out well because they actually, kept that game fairly close. Ended up losing to Phoenix only by 4 points. Wasn't the highest scoring game, but Boucher at 5,400. He also offers that power forward eligibility, which is always great. So keep your eye on that news. I think he instantly comes into play. I don't really want to pay the $10K for Van Vliet or the $9,500 for Siakam. Wouldn't fault you if you did want to. So in all honesty, it would probably just end up being OG and Boucher if both those guys sit. We're just going to see a nice little usage tick for a guy like OG when Gary Trent is out of the lineup. It just equals more opportunities for him to take a few more three-pointers. They're going to need the floor spacing. So those are probably the two main guys I have interest in. Outside of that, I'm not really looking at anybody else on Toronto.
Yeah, Toronto's an interesting team. I might throw some shots at Chris Boucher. It's always a risk to play Bobby Boucher, aka Chris Boucher, in lineups. But at 5,400, he is getting some solid minutes. If we get word of any potential players out for the Pistons, this could be turned into a blowout. So I do like Boucher as kind of a blowout-proof potential player. I also like OG Anunoby is definitely going to be in play for me in terms of lineup to 6,500. I think he's a great solid floor. I'm also going to be having some shares for tournaments of Scottie Barnes. If we get word that Scottie Barnes is playing, 6,400 is a great price tag for Scottie. We've seen his upside earlier in his rookie year where he's putting up double-doubles, can get you a little bit of everything. Definitely one of the top 5 rookies definitely this year as far as what he's done so far for the Raptors. So I do like him a little bit also for tournaments. And then Fred VanVleet at 10,000, a little bit too high of a price tag for me to pay because this has blowout written all over it. Pascal Siakam, same kind of thing, 9,500, just a little bit too high of a price tag for a guy that might only see 25, 30 minutes of this game ends up being a blowout quickly. So I'm not going to have too many shares there on the Raptors side of the ball.
I'm taking a hard pass on Detroit, man. I don't know if there's anything you want to throw in there. Just don't really like any of these price tags. Don't like any of these options. Matchups okay, but all in all, 9 games on the slate. I'm ready to cross them off unless there's anything else you want to add.
Yeah, I would say the only thing that I might throw into lineups on the Pistons side of the ball is a guy like Isaiah Stewart at 4,600. He's a guy that can get 25, 30 minutes. If he does play 25, 30 minutes, at 4,600, it's a pretty good price tag. He has 30-point upside. That's a good salary to pay, but I'm with you. I don't see a lot of interest in anyone else. Kate Cunningham is just priced too high, 7,600. In this type of matchup, I don't see this game staying close where any of these guys are going to get enough run to justify their price tags.
All right, we'll keep it moving then. Third game of the night, 7 p.m. Eastern Star Time. Phoenix Sun traveling to Indiana, taking on the Pacers. For the injury report, Malcolm Brogdon is questionable in this one. Sounds like he's pretty close to returning. I know he was close to returning in that last one. They opted to rest him. He did practice on Thursday. Torrey Craig is questionable. TJ McConnell, TJ Warren continue to be out. Cam Johnson is questionable after that left ankle sprain. He missed that last game. Frank Kaminsky, Abdul Nader, Dario Saric all rolled out. Ish Wainwright is questionable coming out of the protocols. This game doesn't have a game total. It does not. So we do not have a game total for this one yet. We're going to have to wait and see on that one. I'll start off with Phoenix here. There's some decent options here, some decent price tags. I think if we see Cam Johnson's ruled out, we can go right back to the well with Jay Crowder. Getting a little bit of a price bump now after, coming off of a pretty, what could be considered a monster game for Jay Crowder. He's 4,900. He was 39, but listen, they're going to need as much size as they have against this team, and we know he's going to get the extra run. Normally a guy that's in the high 20s, low 30s. Came out, got like 3 or 4 more extra minutes with Cam Johnson out. So keep your eye on that news. If Cam Johnson sits again, we can go right back to the well with Jay Crowder. Don't mind that. Decent little value play if you land on him. Not necessarily somebody that I'm going out of my way to build around. And then I don't mind taking a stab at a guy like Chris Paul at 7,900. I think there's better point guard options that we will talk about, but I just don't see myself paying the 88 for Booker in this matchup. No fault to him. I think he's a great player, and I think, any other night I don't mind targeting him. But on a 9-game slate, I just think that there's a couple better price tags out there. The floor is just a little too low where on off nights or on blowouts or anything like that, he's looking at anywhere between 28 to 34, and at 8,800, I'll leave him on the table. So it's really just going to be a minute share of Paul and then a little bit of Jay Crowder for me.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you here. I think that the Chris Paul news is going to be important here. 7,900 is a pretty high price tag. And you mentioned there's a bunch of guys in that price tier that I'd much rather have a point guard. But if we get news he's playing, I definitely might fire up some Chris Paul. If we find out that he's somehow out of this game, Cameron Payne becomes a nice floor 4,400 value. So I'm going to be looking there if we get some news early on. It's a 7 p.m. tip-off, which helps us as well. So we'll get some news in terms of who's playing and who's not playing pretty quickly as well. So other than that, there's not a ton of interest. I'm not going to go Jay Crowder at 4,900. I don't think that price tag warrants him. DeAndre 8,600. 7,600 is a little bit too high as well for me. So I'm not going to be going in that direction either. Cameron Johnson, if he ends up playing 5,500, coming off the bench now, might be worth a shot. Again, if we expect Chris Paul and everyone to suit up, Cameron Johnson might get some extra run if this game ends up being a blowout against the Pacers. But again, we won't know until closer to tip-off. But those are some guys that I'm looking at as well on the Phoenix Suns side of the ball. But this is not a great matchup for them, regardless, when it comes to DFS.
Yep. On the other side of the ball, there's only one guy that kind of piques my interest based on price, and that's Miles Turner at 5,800. Everybody else, I think, is priced appropriately, especially if Brogdon comes back. Not really looking at Levert at 83 with Brogdon back in that lineup. Duarte had the birth of his child. He is back in this game. So with both Brogdon, like if Brogdon plays, I'm assuming, again, things may change. But if he does play, Duarte's back. I think that, the Lance Stevenson shine may be gone. We'll probably see that wear off. So Sabonis at 10K, there's better spend ups in my opinion. I'd rather spend the 89 on LaMelo than spend 10-1 on Sabonis. So when it's all said and done, it's probably just a couple shares of Miles Turner. But even then, it's not something that's a must play.
Yeah, Sabonis is a little bit too high of a price tag for me. Again, 10,100, and it's definitely going to be an interesting play. Having Domantas Sabonis, in terms of lineups. In terms of building lineups, I think going up against the Suns is never good. They're one of the better defenses we have in the league. So I'm not going to be targeting too many guys on the Pacers side of the ball, especially if Brogdon ends up playing. He's going to make a very much a cluster in terms of the Pacers, especially with Karis LeVert back in lineups. 8,300 is still too high of a price tag for me to go Karis LeVert as well. Lance Stevenson had a great run, 5,100, but I think that run is going to be over now. With all these guys back in the lineup. There's a bunch of guys that we might be looking at, but given this game and given how many games we have on the slate, I'm not going to have a lot of interest in anyone on the Pacers side of the ball either.
All right, we will keep it moving. Boston Celtics traveling to Philadelphia, taking on the 76ers here. For the injury report, we'll start here with Boston. Marcus Smart is questionable due to health and safety protocols. Sam Hauser has been rolled out. And then for the Sixers, Danny Green, Shake Milton, Ben Simmons, Jaden Springer, Braxton Key, all ruled out in this one. For the injury report, it's a 211.5 game total. We have Philly being favored by 3 points. Starting off here, looking at Boston, obviously I think Marcus Smart is going to be the key cog that we need to keep an eye on here. If he sits, it's a big boom just for a guy like Dennis Schroeder at 5,400. Marcus Smart doesn't have the highest usage, but it's the minutes. Obviously, the minutes get distributed pretty much exclusively between three players, which would be Schroeder, Josh Richardson, Peyton Pritchard. Out of those three, I think Schroeder and Josh Richardson would be the main guys that I'm targeting. I think both of them decent floors, decent upsides, and they're both at pretty rock-solid price tags. Schroeder would probably end up being the highest-owned player I have out of the group, but I wouldn't fault you if you wanted to go somewhere else. And then with Pradham, just combine Pritchard and Jason Tatum's names, and I just almost said it again.
A new nickname. I love it.
But exactly. That's what I was going for. But with his price tag now dipping, 2 games in a row where he's been under 10K. He was 95 against Indiana. Now he's down to 93. We're seeing that him and Jaylen Brown's price tags get closer and closer due to Brown's recent performances over the past 3 games. I don't mind taking a stab at a guy like Tatum in this one. I think that he won't draw a ton of ownership. These two teams have faced off twice already this season. He's averaging about 48 DK points against them in those 2 games. So at 9,300, they're going to need him, bottom line. And he gets, it looks like he's actually been killing the boards against this team, which comes as a little bit of a shocker. But a lot of that's probably due just because this team wants to shoot threes against the Sixers. It's not a team that you really want to drive to the rack on. So you usually see a lot more teams try to take threes against them, which creates longer rebounds. So I'm good with taking shots at Schroeder, Tatum, maybe a hair of Josh Richardson. The Horford price is enticing, but it's burned me the past 2 games. I do think this is one of those matchups that you could target him. I'm not going to sit here and say go ahead and play him like I did. I think it was 2 games ago, and I do apologize for that. Listen, if I tell you to play someone, I probably had shares of them, and it burned me too. So I thought the first matchup against Indiana was the one to target because they're going to need his size in the front court. But this is going against a team that he did not have a good time playing for. He thought he was mismanaged, misused over there. There might be a little angst built into this. So keep that in mind. It is a good matchup for him, but I'll probably still end up with more Schroeder and Tatum than anybody.
Yeah, definitely interesting matchup here against the Sixers. It's definitely a rivalry that's been brewing for a while with Embiid versus the Celtics. So on the Boston side of the ball, I love your call, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. They're pretty much priced well here. Under 10K, they both have monster upside, 55, 60-point fantasy upside in this game. It's just a question of which guy I trust more. And I'm going to probably lean more Jaylen Brown and take the $100 in savings just because he's been more consistent recently. Over his last 3 games, we've seen a much more consistent effort. He's a guy that's getting rebounds now, despite the fact that the Celtics have all the size. Brown's getting those boards, and I think he's going to continue to do so against the Sixers despite of all of that. So I do like Brown. My favorite play probably on the Celtics side of the ball. I also like Marcus Smart if he plays. 5,700 is a great price tag. We'll have to monitor that situation closely. If he ends up sitting, Dennis Schroeder 5,400 is going to be chalk, but also it's a great opportunity to target Dennis here. So I definitely will be looking in that direction. In terms of the front court, I do like the narrative. Anyone who listens will definitely know that I do love a good revenge narrative here with Al Horford as well. 5,200 is a very low price tag, but we haven't seen Al Horford play much at all recently. We haven't seen any kind of effort. He hasn't been shooting the ball much. He hasn't been really involved in the offensive side of the ball. This could be the game that he changes things, but I'm not going to have too many shares of him. Definitely more for tournaments. And Robert Williams also 7K is a little bit too high of a price tag for me going up against Embiid. Embiid is traditionally very good against centers, so I'm not going to have a lot of interest there. It's going to be Jaylen Brown with a little bit of Dennis Schroeder as well. And then I won't fault anyone going Jason Tatum. I just think he's a little bit too high price tag for me in this kind of matchup as well.
Can't fault you, man. On the Philly side of the ball, definitely some things to, I guess, I wouldn't say monitor. We pretty much have all the news that we need to have on them. But there's really only one guy, and there's no secret here. It's going to be Joel Embiid. This dude has just been cooking during the month of January with hot oil. I mean, the only player I've ever seen in, 6 straight games get 31 points in a row. I don't know if he's just making that like a thing that he wants to do at this point, but he's literally had 31 actual points now for, 5 straight games in a row. But he's had at least 30 actual points or 31 actual points over the past 8. So this dude has just been on fire. He's been torching the Celtics all season long in the 2 matchups that they faced earlier in the year. He's averaged about 65 DK points against him. He probably will end up being my top spend up. It's hard to say because there's Luka on the slate, and Luka's been playing much better as well. And I think it's a little underpriced, but we have some options where, with all these other spend ups, I'm fading a lot of them, to be honest. We'll get to those guys in a little while. You'll hear me say their names, but I do think that Embiid is probably well worth the spend up with just his recent performance and the matchup. Anybody else on this Sixers team that you have interest in?
Yeah, the only other guy I'm looking at, Embiid is a fantastic call. I'm definitely going to be looking at a lot of shares in Embiid. He's going to be a high owned, but for good reason, as one of the highest priced players on this entire slate. He should absolutely eat against the Celtics front court. And he has been on the level in terms of consistency recently, definitely willing them to the playoffs at this point. So he continues this matchup. He's going to be an MVP conversation for sure. As far as any other Sixers for me, Tyrese Maxey, 5,600, gets some love. Despite a poor effort against the Hornets, I expect a nice bounce back effort. I don't think Tyrese Maxey can shoot 30% from the field again against Boston, and he's going to be low owned to boot. So I think he's going to be a little bit more of a tournament play for me. But under 6K is a great price tag. I do like him here as another option. but definitely going to be heavy into Embiid with a little bit of shares of Tyrese Maxey to round it out for my Philadelphia squad.
All right, we will keep it moving. Golden State Warriors traveling to Chicago. They are taking on the Bulls. Second half of back-to-back for the Warriors, who put out one of the worst first half performances of the season. Not even just for them. I would say in terms of the season, I believe when I looked, it was like 77 to 38 or something crazy. I could be wrong there. Don't quote me on that. But either way, they got absolutely smoked by the Bucks. Giannis put up a triple-double on them. Nonetheless, it's a new day. Turn the slate. Let's see what's going on here, though. For the Bulls, Alex Caruso, Tyler Cook, Javonte Green, Derek Jones Jr., and Patrick Williams have all been ruled out. We're not going to have a game total on this one. I forgot to mention that last one because, of course, I did. It is 211.5 game total. 3-point spread for Philly. I just lied. We do have one for this one. 222.5. Chicago being favored by 3 in this one. So I will pass it over to you. Talk about this Warriors team, I guess what you're expecting from them and who you're targeting.
Yeah, I think Warriors are going to be motivated, especially after getting blown out off the court. I don't think a lot of players got tired in this game. So I definitely like a few guys on the Warriors side of the ball. I'm going to be looking at Steph Curry, 2,600. He's long overdue for a big-time performance. I mean, he did have a big one against the Grizzlies. A few nights ago, we had triple-double, but then he had a letdown, obviously, tonight. But I do like Curry as a nice bounce back, under 11K. It's not the best matchup going up against the Bulls by any means, but this is going to be a game where I think he's going to show up and really play well. So I'm going to have some shares of Mr. Curry here. In this matchup. I'm also going to be looking at Klay Thompson as well, 5,800. Price under 6K still. We haven't seen a signature Klay Thompson performance yet. He's only been getting about 20 minutes a game so far. I think is an opportunity. Actually, he's out. Sorry, apologies. Disregard what I just said. Disregard everything I just said. Klay Thompson.
All good, man. All good.
It's going to be completely out. So I'm going to be going Jordan Poole. A quick pivot to Jordan Poole at 5K. Price to move, absolutely. He's going to move into the starting lineup, I think, going up against the Bulls. He's going to get plenty of shots, and it's pretty good value as well to 5K. So I'm going to be looking at Jordan Poole and Steph Curry. Front court is kind of a mess with the Warriors. Juan Toscano-Anderson at 3,500, but he's not getting any minutes. So I'm not going to be going in that direction. With Draymond Green out, there's not a ton that I'm really targeting on the Warriors side of the ball. So I'm going to be looking at Jordan Poole, in the back court, along with Steph Curry, and that's it for me on the Warriors going up against this very solid Bulls defense.
I'm right there with Poole. He's probably going to be one of my higher owned players, and to no surprise, he'll be very chalky. I think a lot of people will go back to him. He'll be right back in that starting lineup. Another thing worth noting is Gary Payton Jr. Left the game with back tightness. He did not return. Good chance that he's not going to be playing tonight either. So with that being said, Jordan Poole would probably be inserted back in that starting lineup regardless. But now they're going to have room at that power forward position instead of just playing a little bit more small ball. So it could be one of those instances where we see Otto Porter or Juan Toscano-Anderson start. If Otto Porter does start in play for me at 4,700, I'd have a ton of interest in him. Also going against one of his former teams. So sign me up for those two players. Those are the two main targets I'm looking at. I know Juan Toscano burned pretty much everybody in the world in that last start that he had. I was one of them. I had shares, but always worth keeping an eye on if he does draw the start. It's just you can't have that faith. You can't trust him in cash, but mostly it's going to be Otto Porter or Jordan Poole for me. On the Chicago side of the ball, a lot to like over here because these price tags are coming back down to earth. They're finally back to reality. All these they had, I think, at one point it was like 3 guys over 9K. Now it feels like all their studs are a little underpriced. And I think a lot of that has to do with Lonzo Ball finally getting back in the lineup and getting into a groove, which, we're not seeing Levine and DeRozan handle the ball as much. So, obviously with a little bit of lower assist totals, they're capped. But I do think it's a good spot for DeRozan at 8,600. Don't mind taking a stab at him here and there. Still probably try to find the extra couple bucks for Tatum. But if you don't have it, he's a great option to go to. Same thing with Levine at 84. I think that's just a little too cheap for Levine. This is going to be a get-right game for the Warriors. It's going to be competitive between these two teams. And anytime we have a competitive game, we know that Levine, DeRozan, those two guys are going to be clicking. They're going to be probably handling the majority of the workload as far as usage goes. I don't mind Vooch, but there's other centers that we've already mentioned that we will mention that I'll have more interest in. But I think Levine and DeRozan, definitely two guys I'm targeting. And then we also need to wait and see, I guess, what they're going to do at the power forward position with both Javonte Green and Derek Jones Jr. rolled out. So it wouldn't shock me if they end up starting DeRozan at the 4, especially knowing that there's no Draymond in this game. They can go small. Again, that just gives him a little bit more boost as far as rebounds are concerned. But then if that's the case, we may end up seeing a scenario where they start a guy like Kobe White at the 2, move Levine up to the 3, DeRozan to the 4. So if that's the case, I don't love the price tag of Kobe White at $5K. I wish he was just a little bit cheaper. Nonetheless, he's been playing great ball lately. So it's worth monitoring, just something to keep a little food for thought there. We're not necessarily going to have the starting lineup probably right away, but it's only a 7:30 start time, half hour after the other start times. So there's a chance that we do. So in all, it's going to be Levine, DeRozan, possibly a little bit of Kobe White, but it wouldn't fault you if you didn't want to test them.
Yeah, the Bulls are definitely interesting. This is a great matchup for them as well, going up against the Warriors with no Draymond Green, their defensive stalwart down low. So I definitely like the DeRozan, Zach LaVine calls. Price in the 8K range, DeRozan is probably going to be a little bit more of a play for me, just because he's got a little bit of higher upside than Zach LaVine, can do a little bit more for this team. So I'm going to be looking at DeMar DeRozan as the number one option on the Bulls side, and then I'm definitely going to have some shares of Zach LaVine as well. And then I like the Kobe White call. I'm actually going to be looking at Lonzo Ball potentially having a nice little game against the Warriors, although, again, it's going to be tough. I don't see how all three are going to be able to get value here against the Warriors, but I'm definitely going to have a lot of shares of all three. And then I like the fade call on Nikola Vucevic. I don't think this is a good matchup against the Warriors. They might play a lot of small ball as well, going up against the Warriors. So I'm definitely going to be looking at a fade for Vucevic. So for me, it's DeRozan. I'm with you. DeRozan, Levine, and then a little bit of Lonzo Ball sprinkled into tournament lineups.
All right. We will keep it moving. Atlanta Hawks traveling to Miami, taking on the Heat. For the Hawks, Clint Capella, Solomon Hill. Well, Solomon Hill is actually traded with Cam Reddish, so both those guys we know are out. Jalen Johnson's doubtful. Kevin Huerter is questionable due to the left foot contusion. And for the Heat, Bam continues to be out, although he's getting closer. Jimmy Butler is questionable. Marcus Garrett, Markieff Morris, KZ Okpala, and Victor Oladipo are all ruled out. 222 game total. Miami being favored by 3 in this one. I'll pass it over to you. Why don't you start with the Hawks here? And I guess what changes for you now that Reddish is going to be out of this rotation? And are there any other wings that you think could step up in his absence?
Yeah, I think with Cam Reddish out of the rotation, there's a couple guys that I'm looking at. It's going to start with Bogdan Bogdanovich. 5,300 is a pretty good price tag. Coming off a string of pretty solid efforts, especially in the last game against the Heat where they got blown out, he still put up almost 30 fantasy points. So I think this game is going to stay pretty close. It's going to be a high-scoring affair. I think the Hawks definitely put up a good effort. So I like Bogdan Bogdanovich as one of the best wings to step up in Cam Reddish's absence. And then Kevin Huerter, if he ends up being out, Bogdan becomes an absolute steal at 5,300. If Kevin Huerter's in, he might be more of a tournament play for me. And then Trae Young on the Hawks side of the ball, always in play, especially if we get word that Jimmy Butler is out. He has 55, 60-point upside if this game stays close. So I definitely like Trae Young here. But again, we have to get news on the Butler side of the ball to see what's going to happen from that perspective. But I do like Bogdan, regardless of what happens with Kevin Huerter. He's definitely going to be one of my favorite targets. And then in the front court, I'm going to have some shares of John Collins at 7K. Priced almost to a point where you have to play him. It's going up against the Heat, and Omar, you're at 7. I just don't think that he's going to be able to match up against him, especially if Clint Capella ends up being out. John Collins should be an absolute smash play in this game, and Clint Capella is out. So apologies. I definitely I honestly cannot read clearly this evening, so apologies to all the listeners. But when it comes down to it, John Collins is definitely going to be a rock solid play, along with Bogdan Bogdanovich, and then sprinkle in some Trae Young for tournaments for me.
Yeah, no, listen, I'm right there with you on Collins. I think Collins is in a fantastic spot. Going to being split in time between the center position and power forward. Should be looking at 35, 36 minutes if this game stays close, which I'm expecting it to. Both teams are good. They're both competitive. Even if Jimmy Butler sits, Miami still finds a way to beat teams. So I do think John Collins at 7K is in a good spot. If Kevin Huerter sits, keep in mind DeAndre Hunter is back. Does he get a big bump in minutes? That's the question mark. He played 24 in his first game back, so I don't think they're going to ramp him straight up to over 30. Probably looking somewhere in the mid to high 20s. 3,400, there's worse value plays you can look at. But another guy that we have to probably mention at the very least would be Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot if Kevin Huerter sits. Just because now that Cam Reddish and, if Huerter's out of the rotation as well, and they're limiting Hunter's minutes a little bit, he's a guy that they started and give spot starts several times this season. Granted, a lot of that was with Bogdanovich out as well. So just something to keep an eye on. I wouldn't be shocked if for some reason they want to take Hunter off the bench and they still want to continue just to start Luwawu-Cabarrot in a spot start. But all in all, it's probably just going to end up being John Collins for me. A little bit of DeAndre Hunter because 3,400 is too cheap for a guy that could play, high 20s at the best case scenario, mid 20s at the worst case scenario. But keep in mind, his game isn't necessarily built around DFS. He's mostly going to be a points and, here and there gets a couple of stocks, whether it's a block or a steal. But 3,400 still. First game back, he put up almost 22 DK points, 15 actual points. It did so on 4 of 11 shooting. So I think those are the two guys I'm primarily looking at. I wouldn't fault you for Bogdanovich. I think he's definitely in play at 5,300. It's a little bit too cheap of a price tag, especially if Huerter sits. I'd have a lot more interest in him in that case. But probably not playing Trae Young here. I'm not playing Okongwu. Now they took away his power forward eligibility and gave him a price increase. So I'll keep it with those guys. On the Heat side of the ball, definitely some things to like over here. Your Sevens price tag is finally getting up to where it should be at 7,200. Takes a lot of the luster away from it, but this dude just continues to rebound at an elite level. And he's even getting a little bit of big man passing going on, and they're taking a page out of Jokic's book with 14 assists over the past 2 games. Don't mind taking a stab at him, but I think all in all, I don't think I'll end up with too many shares of him. Not a guy that I'm crossing out of the player pool just yet, but not somebody that I'm overly excited about. Outside of him, I think I'm looking at a guy like Kyle Lowry at 7,900. I'd rather see Butler sit, but anytime we see a point guard go against Trae Young, we kind of have to lick our lips knowing that Trae Young is statistically one of the worst defensive point guards in the league. The price tag's right where it should be, so we're not getting a discount or anything. He's not a must play or anything like that, but if you're looking to get exposure to this game and you just don't want to play a guy like, your 7 or Hero, I think this is definitely a good spot to take a look at. And then only other guy worth mentioning if Butler sits again would be Caleb Martin. He's been playing 30-plus minutes pretty much every game that Butler sat. And at 4,600, there's worse small forward options you could look at.
Yeah, this will be interesting on the Heat side of the ball. Jimmy Butler affects a lot of lineup decisions here for me as well as everyone else, I imagine. So if Butler's out, Tyler Hero, 7,800, I think I'd rather pay that price over Kyle Lowry, 7,900. Coming off back-to-back 51-point efforts, I think Tyler Hero can absolutely smash in this spot against the Hawks' porous defense, especially if Butler's out. If Butler's out, I love the Caleb Martin call at 4,600, coming off a shocking double-double with rebounds, actually. Definitely a guy that's going to be in play for me if Butler's out. And then you can definitely look Omar at 7. I'm not going to have a lot of shares there. I think his price is now too high at 7,200 in terms of where I think he's going to be able to match up. I'm looking at 2 guys I'm really looking at are going to be, as I mentioned, it's going to be Caleb Martin and it's going to be Tyler Hero in the backcourt. And that's it for me on the Heat side of the ball.
All right. 3 games left on the docket. Cleveland Cavaliers traveling to San Antonio to take on the Spurs in this one. For the injury report, Isaac Okoro and Rajon Rondo, both questionable. As we know, Ricky Rubio, Colin Sexton out for the year, both of them. We're going to have to obviously monitor those 2 guys just because they're 2 significant parts of this rotation at this point. But keep your eye on it, worth noting. And then on the Spurs, we have Zach Collins continues to be out. Trey Jones is out. Derek White is questionable. I'm expecting him to play in this one. He was ruled out. He's out of the health and safety protocols, but he sat out that last game. I imagine just give him another day or 2 for conditioning as well. But I expect him to play in this one. And then Drew Eubanks is probable as well. As far as a game total is concerned, we have this one at 220.5, with Cleveland being favored by 2. Looking at this Cleveland side of the ball, there's one guy that is kind of criminally underpriced. That's Darius Garland. 7,800 is just too cheap for how well this dude has been playing all season long. I mean, for the past week or 2, he's been routinely priced over 8K, touching almost 10K. At one point, he was 9,700 for 2 games straight. But this dude's just routinely dropping high 30s, low 40s on what feels like a daily basis. Has the upside for 50, even 60. We saw him triple-double in that last one. At 7,800, he's going to be one of my favorite point guards on the slate. Probably the reason why I don't end up landing on Lowry or those other guys too much. So absolutely all on board of Garland in this one. Outside of Garland, keep your eye on a guy like Lamar Stevens. I don't love this guy. I don't love playing him at all. He's coming off of a couple big games. I don't expect him to continue shooting as well as he has been over the past 2 games, 67%, 80%, 73%. So it's definitely out of the norm and unsustainable shooting percentages. So he's about due to come down to earth. But the bottom line is, if Rajon Rondo does happen to sit out this game, they just don't have that many ball handlers. I mean, they could play Pangos a little bit, but I don't see them necessarily going that route. It's just going to probably be heavy minutes for Garland and a decent amount of, guys like I'm saying, like Lamar Stevens. So I'll probably just end up falling on those 2 guys, more or less. But again, not too much Stevens, tons of Garland. And I wouldn't fault you if you wanted to look in their front court. Definitely decent options. I think both those guys are priced appropriately. I'd probably lean more Mobley just based on the eligibility at power forward and being $400 with that discount. But I wouldn't fault you if you want to look at Jared Allen too. 7,700. The dude's averaging 38 DK points per game this season. Hasn't had too many monster games stretched in a row like we were seeing at one point when Mobley was out, and that's probably the big reason behind it, is that now he's sharing that front court. He's got to split the rebounds. It was at one point where he's routinely grabbing. It was like 14 boards or more in a game for like 8 straight games, and he still has that upside. It's just obviously going to come a little bit more fewer and far in between, knowing Mobley's back in that lineup. But anybody else that you are looking at on this Cleveland team?
Yeah, the Cleveland team is interesting. I think you touched on the smash play, and obviously going to be a chalk play. Darius Garland coming off a triple-double should be absolutely clean up in this matchup against the San Antonio Spurs. And then Lamar Stevens is a guy that is definitely in play for me. Price 3,700. Even if he doesn't sustain his hot shooting, I still think there's some value there at under 4K. And there's not a ton of value that we've mentioned so far on this slate. So I definitely will have some shares of Lamar Stevens as well. And then the final guy you touched on as well as a potential opportunity. And I think he's priced to a point where I might actually go there. And that's going to be Jared Allen, 7,700. Going up against Spurs front court. We know this is a good matchup for him. Potential for a monster double-double here. If this game stays close especially, Jared Allen is in store for huge minutes and a huge opportunity to really smash his price tag. So those are the 3 guys I'm looking at. In terms of ranking, it's going to be Garland number 1, and then it's going to go Lamar Stevens number 2, and then I'm going to sprinkle in Jared Allen in a lot of tournament lineups as well.
All right, we'll slide over to the Spurs. Battle of the triple-doubles, because we have DeJounte Murray coming off of one of his best games of the season, a monster triple-double, going against that Houston team. So, listen, I'm not going to fault you if you want to play there. I just like a lot of these mid-tier point guards, that we've mentioned. We just talked about Garland. We'll get to somebody in the next game. LaMelo Ball earlier in the night. So I think he makes for a good pivot off of some of these spend-ups if you wanted to go that route, off of Embiid or off of Luka. But for the most part, I think I'm going to ride that mid-tier, especially if Derek White does return in this game. It's not going to just take all the value away from Murray. I mean, Murray's been putting up monster games left and right all season long, but it's definitely going to take some of the shine away from him. So for the most part, there's one guy that I have in my player pool at this point, and it's going to be Jakob Poeltl. Simply as a cash option, he routinely puts up 30 DK point games left and right, has the upside for 40, but he's never really burning you. You're never getting burned by Jakob Poeltl. They're going to need his size in this matchup, so he's probably the only guy on the Spurs team I really have any interest in.
Yeah, that's a great call out on Jakob Poeltl. I think it's a guy that might be overlooked, especially going up against the Cavs' big front court, but to your point, someone has to rebound for the Spurs alongside of DeJounte Murray. So I think this is a perfect opportunity to target a guy like Poeltl, especially for tournaments. And then DeJounte is going to get a ton of value here. Despite $10,200 price tag, going off a monster triple-double, the return of Derek White definitely limits him a little bit, but it also opens him up to get a little bit more assists as well. Apologies. So I definitely like DeJounte Murray. I like him a little less if Derek White plays, but if Derek White's ruled out, fire up some DeJounte Murray for another opportunity for dueling triple doubles here in this matchup. So those are the 2 guys I'm looking at as well. I'm not gonna have a lot of interest in Lonnie Walker at 5K. That price is a little bit too high. I like Lonnie Walker a lot more earlier when he was under 5K. I'm not going to be going in that direction. Same goes with Josh Primo. Devin Vessel at 4K is a guy that he's back, has opportunity to get 25 30 fantasy points, but I don't know if this is the best matchup. So I'll probably have a couple of shares of Devin Vessel just because I think he could be a tournament winner for a lot of people. But I'm not going to be going in that direction for cash games. So it's going to be for cash, it's going to be Jonathan Murray and then Jakob Poeltl, and that's it for me.
All right, we'll move on. 2 of late games, 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time start times. Houston Rockets traveling to Sacramento, taking on them Kings. We do not have an injury report for the Rockets right now, but for the Kings, Rashawn Holmes is questionable. Tristan Thompson is questionable. Damian Jones is still in the health and safety protocols. Jameis Ramsey's in the G League, and then Robert Woodward II has been placed into the health and safety protocols. This game total, as I mentioned earlier, the highest of the night, 235. Sacramento being favored by 5 points. I'll keep it short and sweet over here in Houston. There's one guy I have interest in, and it's Christian Wood at 7,400. This seems like it's going to be a smash spot for him. It's just that simple for me, especially if Rashawn Holmes happens to sit. But the Kings have been pretty terrible against opposing centers all season long. You're going to want some shares of this game due to the high nature and fast pace and everything else that comes with it. Both these teams play pretty quickly. So I think when you just look at the actual game environment, having at least one guy on each side of the ball might be something worth doing. You don't need to. There's 9 games on the slate and 9-game slates. You don't need to do anything. But I do think it's if I'm looking at anybody on Houston, because, I mean, Kevin Porter Jr. is at a good price tag. I don't mind him. He has the upside, a little bit more risk associated with him, obviously, because we've seen some pretty poor performance from him in the past. We've also seen him drop triple-doubles and put up damn near 50, 60 on nights. So he's in play, but I still think I just prefer Christian Wood a little bit more than him, and that's probably it for me over here.
Yeah, Christian Wood's going to be an absolute smash play here, 7,400. I think it's a good price tag for Christian Wood regardless, especially if he has the ability to keep this game close. Going up against the Kings front court, should be able to get double-double upside for sure. And that price is still at a point where we can still target Christian Wood. I'm not going to have a ton of interest of anyone else really on the Rockets side of the ball. The only guy that I'm going to have some shares in is going to be Jae'Sean Tate at 5,300, coming off a nice game. We've seen some nice games of Jae'Sean Tate. He just hasn't been consistent to this point, which is definitely concerning. I don't know if he's going to continue to play inconsistent basketball, but I'm going to definitely be more targeting a guy that like Jae'Sean Tate for tournaments just because of his volatile abilities as well. So I'm going to be looking at Christian Wood number 1. And then also I'm going to have a little bit of interest in Kevin Porter Jr. at 6,000. It's always difficult to target a guy Kevin Porter Jr. because he's very volatile as well. But this is a great opportunity, a great matchup against the Kings. Should be a high-scoring affair as well. So I'm going to be looking at those 3 guys, with Christian Wood being the absolute number 1 option for me on the Rockets side of the ball.
All right, we'll move over to the, I guess, more alluring side of the ball, which is the Sacramento Kings here. Definitely a lot of guys we're going to want to target, or at least very, very well look at going against this Houston team. I mentioned it before. They play at an extremely fast pace, one of the fastest in the NBA. They have very porous defense. They give up points all over the place. De'Aaron Fox, 7,600. Yep, I'm good with it. I talked about it. There's a few point guards in that range that I find myself playing, which is why I don't see myself spending all the way up on point guard tonight. We've seen some up and down performances from Derek White, but this is definitely a get-right spot. He scored at least 29 points in 3 out of the last 5 games. It just all depends on whether it's just shots falling or not. When he shot more than 47% from the floor in that 5-game span, he's put up at least 38.5 DK points, almost 50 against Denver, which we saw 11 of 23 shooting. Always couples in a couple rebounds and a couple assists. With Haliburton in that starting lineup with him, it obviously does hinder his assist totals. We're kind of seeing Haliburton play a little bit more on ball, which is, I think it's something that Fox is getting used to. But it obviously puts Haliburton in play as well. So having one of these guys in my lineup is probably going to happen in, I would say, a majority of my cores when I'm doing my multi-entry. It's just Haliburton has that dual eligibility. So if I find myself going with, let's say I wanted to play like a little bit of LaMelo, maybe a little bit of Darius Garland, then I might find myself with a little bit more Haliburton. But these guys are both very, very much in play now. And if we also see that Holmes and Tristan Thompson are both ruled out, I think we can look at Bagley and plug our nose and cross our fingers. It's not something I usually do, just being flat out honest with you guys. But he's played 30 minutes against LA. I mean, they don't love to play Alex Len big minutes if they don't have to. This isn't one of those matchups where they necessarily need to. And if that's the case, we might see a decent amount of Bagley coming out of the in this spot. Keep your eye on it. If Len does draw that start again, wouldn't fault you for looking at him at 3,800. We did not mention a ton of value available. But for the most part, I'm going to be targeting these backcourt mates. But you throw it in there. Is there anybody else you're kind of looking at? I mean, they're all pretty fair price tags. They're all in great spots. So if you wanted to go to any of these guys, I wouldn't fault you. But for the most part, it's probably going to be the backcourt.
Yeah, it's tough to play in the wings as well. I mean, you touched on the backcourt. It's kind of a toss-up with De'Aaron Fox and Halliburton. The price $200 in difference. $200 difference is definitely a challenge in picking the two guys. I mean, they do a little bit of different things. Halliburton's more of a distributor, Fox is more of a scorer, but they're both going to be in play. It should be an absolute smash opportunity for both guys. I'll probably go more Halliburton just to save $200 if I can. As far as wings go, I don't have a lot of interest in Buddy Hield for 600. I think he's a guy that gets hot and cold. It's a great opportunity for him, but I don't know if I'm going to go I'm not going to have a lot of shares in him. Harrison Barnes, a guy that is coming off a nice 38-point effort against the Lakers. He woke up a little bit, started to score, started to put up some shots, but we haven't seen that level of consistency of Harrison Barnes in quite some time, in months actually. So I'm not going to have interest there as well. I'll have a little bit of interest in Marvin Bagley at 4,800 going up against the Rockets, but he's too inconsistent for me. It's going to be also mostly the backcourt as well. So I'm with you 100% on the backcourt.
Final game of the night now. We have the Grizzlies on a back-to-back. They are defending their home court against the Mavericks. Got to keep an eye out on some news on this Grizzlies team because it is a back-to-back for them. They're already missing bodies. Looks like Ja Morant was dealing with some back soreness or back tightness throughout the game. Still playing significant minutes, but it might be one of those things where he ends up coming out of that game feeling a little sore for the next day. So keep your eye on that news. For the Mavericks, Willie Cauley-Stein, Kristaps Porzingis, only guys on the injury report, both ruled out. I will pass it over to you. Why don't you talk about Dallas?
Yeah, the Dallas team is interesting. Coming off an absolute blowout effort, going and traveling and take on the Knicks. I don't know if Luka is going to be heavily involved. I think he's a guy that should be able to shoot better than 8 of 23 from the field. In fact, he shot 8 of 23 from the field in his last 2 games, ironically. So I think he's overdue for a great shooting effort, and this is a perfect opportunity against the Grizzlies, especially if we get news that Ja Morant does sit. I do like Luka a lot at 10,900. He's a great play for me. And another guy I'm looking at is going to be Tim Hardaway Jr. at 5,000. Another guy that hasn't been shooting the ball well, but he's getting some heavy minutes, especially with guys like Porzingis out of the lineup. I definitely like him in this type of game. I think it could be a high-paced game against the Grizzlies, who are coming off a tough-fought game against the Timberwolves. This should be a great opportunity for Tim Hardaway as well. And that's pretty much it for me on the Dallas side of the ball. I don't have a lot of interest in anyone else in the front court. They're all priced pretty fairly, and none of them offer enough upside for me in this type of game scenario.
Yeah, I don't like anybody on Dallas, to be honest. I mean, like I said earlier, I don't mind Luka. He's just been shooting so bad over the past 4 games. He's under 39% in all 4 of those games. I think the 5th one, it was like 42 or 43%. So he has been struggling from the floor. But the great part about Luka Doncic is he doesn't need to shoot well if he's going to be racking up rebounds and assists like he has been. So we should continue to see probably, I would say, a 50 to 60-point game from him, which will pay off that salary is what I'm imagining. It's just so many good mid-tier options. Is it worth spending up on 2 guys on this slate when we haven't talked about a lot of value? Now, granted, we may see some open up. That's always an option for us. By the time you guys hear this, there might be some more that opens up, let alone before lock. But I'm not really targeting anybody heavily on this Dallas side of the ball. On the Memphis side of the ball, like I said, keep an eye on Ja Morant, because if he happens to sit, Tyus Jones would become the chalk value play at 4,400. It's just eat it. It's worth it. And also be a big boom for Melton as well. Both those guys, I prefer Jones over Melton just because the coaching staff for some reason just dislikes Melton more than anything. Just don't want to play this guy minutes at all. Keep an eye on Steven Adams. He sat out this game due to a non-COVID related illness. There's a decent chance he's able to suit up on the back-to-back going against Dallas, which would obviously impact guys like Kyle Anderson and Brandon Clark. We saw Kyle Anderson draw the start at the 4. If he does that again, I do have interest in Kyle Anderson at 52. John Morant at 92. I just don't think I'll be going there due to some of these other options we've already spoke about at the point guard position. But for the most part, it's going to be based on news. Tyus Jones if Morant sits, Kyle Anderson, maybe even a little Sharon Jackson Jr. if Steven Adams sits, and that's probably going to be it for me for the most part. I don't mind Desmond Bane. He's a little underpriced, but on a 9-game slate, I think there's better options out there. But I wouldn't fault you if you wanted to go there. The guy's been pretty much routinely putting up, outside of that, the Golden State game, 40 DK points. It feels like almost on a regular basis with Dylan Brooks out of the lineup. They just need somebody else to shoot the rock. And he seems to be growing into one of the league's better three-point shooters. So some options. We got options here, but we also need to kind of keep an eye on what the news report looks like because it is the final game of the night. So if you're playing anybody in this game, you might want to keep them down in your utility spot or that forward guard spot just so you have easy accessibility to swap out if you need to.
You know what? I could not have said it any better myself for the final team of the slate. When it comes to the Grizzlies, if John Moran ends up being out, Tyus Jones is going to be chalk, and for good reason. I think he's going to put up a nice little game here against the Mavericks. But we have to get the news up front. The guy that is worth mentioning that I know I wanted to touch on is John Konchar. 3,400 is a guy that coming off a game against Timberwolves tonight where he had 17 rebounds in just an unbelievable double-double. We see these type of outlier rebounding efforts from John Konchar. We saw it a couple weeks ago against the Kings. This would be a great opportunity for him to repeat against the Mavericks, truthfully. And we definitely didn't touch on a lot of value on the slate. So he's a guy that's priced very low and should be able to hit value if we definitely get the news that John Morant's out. John Konchar becomes a fantastic play for me at 3,400 as well. And then in the front court, if Steven Adams plays, 300 is a great matchup. It's going to be a matchup nightmare for the Mavericks. We saw what Mitchell Robinson could do against the Dallas front court last night. So it's definitely a guy that should be able to put up another monster double-double if we get news that he's back in the lineup. So that's going to be very important to monitor, which you touched on as well. I'm not going to have a lot of interest in Sharon Jackson Jr. at 7,200. I think that's a fair price tag for him. He has 50-point upside. I just don't know if he's going to get there. Desmond Bane as well. 6,800 is a very fair price for Desmond as well. And then if John Moran ends up playing at 9,200, John Moran is going to be a fantastic play. I don't see him playing in this game. So I definitely am going to be leaning more at Tyus Jones here.
Don't fault you, my friend. And that brings us full circle to the end, to our player tier segment. So I will pass it over to you. Who is your high-priced spend up? Anybody over 8K? Who do you see yourself having the most ownership in?
Absolutely. This is tough. Any guys over 8K for me, my favorite play is going to probably have to be it's a real toss-up here, but it's going to have to be, we touched on as one of the better plays, it's going to be Jaylen Brown at 9K on the Celtics side of the ball. What about you?
I'm probably just going to eat it here and go Joel Embiid. I mentioned it. There's not a lot of guys I feel like I need to spend up on. We talked about a few center options on this slate, but just the past history of him crushing Boston, knowing that, this team basically needs him. He's been routinely putting up 30-point games. 31 is the key number here. 31-point games over the past 5 games, and even before that. It just seems like this dude's in a rhythm right now where anything less than 30 actual points feels like a disappointment. And if he hits that 30-point mark, he's got a pretty decent chance at paying off his salary. We're even talking about 3 out of the past 4 games. He has not had more than 8 rebounds, which is pretty out of the ordinary for a guy averaging 10.5 rebounds on the year. So everything gets right game. He loves playing against Boston. He's taking advantage of this team pretty much every single game of his career at this point. I was probably looking at some Joel Embiid, but there were some other noteworthy options that, hopefully you didn't just skip to the end and you heard us talk about, because I don't think Embiid is a must-play. I think he'll be the highest owned play. But it just makes sense the way my builds are looking to say him over Doncic simply because of all the other guard value that we mentioned. Now for the mid-tier play, anyone between 5 and 8K, who is your favorite option?
I mean, I'm going to be cheating here, and we touched on he's going to probably be very high owned, but it's going to be Darius Garland at 7,800. There's a few guys in that price range that in the point guard position and in the guard position are going to be great plays. And I think Darius Garland is one of the best. And he's my favorite play at that price tag. Going up against the Spurs, I think it should be a big opportunity for him to get another close to a triple-double here.
Can't fault you. I'll go with, it's going to be a tough one for me to say because I want to say just Kings backcourt. But we'll go with Mr. Halliburton here at 7,400. Just to get you that shooting guard eligibility. So I know we talked about so many other point guards on this slate, but the guy just does it all. He continues to just put up monster defensive numbers pretty much night in and night out. On top of the ability to rack up assists, feels like he has a very, very safe floor with the upside of anywhere between 40 and 50 DK points. So I don't mind looking at Halliburton, but if you wanted to, if you're leaning more Fox, you won't hear me. I'll have plenty of shares of both those guys. And then for value, we didn't touch on a ton of guys, but it's a nice wide range for us here. So under 5K or less, who are you looking at?
Yeah, from value perspective, it's definitely going to be contingent on John Morant news. But if John Morant's out, I touched on John Konchar, 3,400. He's going to be probably low owned unless we get the news pretty early in terms of John Morant being out. But I do like him. I think he slides into 25, 30 minutes in this game against the Mavericks and should put up pretty good numbers here. And then at that value price tag, 3,400, I think he should be able to have a pretty good return on investment as well.
Yeah, no, listen, I won't argue with Mr. Konchar. I'd probably end up with more Tyus Jones if we see Morant sit. Try to, I think they'll both be fairly high owned, especially Konchar coming off from the monster game. But I'm going to cheat and just say I'll give 2 because one of them I feel like is a cheat because he's right on that 5K mark, and it's going to be Jordan Poole. With Klay Thompson sitting out of this one, going to draw that start. They're going to need his shooting. They're going to need everything that they can get from the guy. But without cheating and outsaying him, and the reason I'm giving 2, I always try to give 2 if there's going to be someone based on an injury contingency, which is going to be Robin Lopez. The dude just crushes every time they need him to start. It's just that simple. If we see that Mo Bamba is not ready to return, you can just fire him up with feeling comfortable about it at 4,400, going against this Hornets team that pretty much sucks all over the place. I'd be good with taking some stabs at him. Past 2 games that he's played at least, actually we can say the past 3 games he's played at least 31 minutes. He scored at least 36.5 DK points. So sign me up for some Robin Lopez at 4,400 if we see that Mo Bamba is ruled out. And now, I know you're not used to doing this over here, my friend, but we're going to slide over to the Thrive Fantasy Picks of the Night, where we each give one of our favorite prop bets to choose from if you are over there playing Thrive. If you're not, what are you waiting for? Sign up, promo code ETHOS. Give me your favorite Thrive Fantasy prop bet of the night.
So I'm gonna actually pass it over to you to have you go first because I am still trying to figure out what exactly I want to go with. So if you don't mind starting it up, and then I'll jump in.
I got no worries there, my friend. I'll go with Christian Wood over on 19.5 points. It gets you a nice solid return of 110. So I mean, it's got 2 points against them because they call an average prop would be 100 over for the over, 100 for the under. So we're getting 110 on the over. I like this matchup for him at 19.5 points. I am not only hoping, almost expecting him to hit that. I wouldn't be surprised if he puts up anywhere between like 22 to 24 actual points in this one. So he will be my pick.
Okay, well, I am going to throw out another guy here. A guy I touched on a little bit, and that was Scottie Barnes on the Raptors. If we end up getting confirmation he's into the lineup, a 9.5 total rebounds and assists, I think is pretty much a lock and load for Mr. Scottie Barnes going up against the Pistons. He has 10 rebound upside in this game alone, so throwing in some assists as well in that prop bet, I think is pretty much easy money here. So I'm going to go Scottie Barnes on the Raptor side.
All right. I like that one. So that is all, folks. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening to us. As always, give us a follow on Twitter. You can follow me at Mike Apotria, MikeApotria. You can find Dave at DMank, correct me if I'm wrong, 33, right, Dave?
Correct.
DMank 33, so it's DMENK 33. Follow Dave on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter. get all the hot takes you can handle. Actually, I'm not that spicy, man. You usually find me tweeting out something random every here and there, and then I'm mostly just trying to retweet as much as the beat reporter news I can see, so you guys can see it in real time, adjust on the fly for building lineups throughout the day. But you always find some useful information out there as well. And then give us a thumbs up, 5-star rate and review wherever you listen. iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, you name it, we're there. Subscribe so you can get the notification as soon as the podcast hits the airwaves. That way you can get a jump on your lineups nice and early. As always, we are a first look podcast, so you're going to hear this get recorded the night before on most nights. So you got to kind of listen to it early. That way you can adjust as soon as you see the news come out. But anything else you want to leave us with, Dave, before we get out of here?
I'm just excited for a 9-game slate, and I hope everyone cashes and does well. And I'm just pumped to get this Friday night started.
All right. Let's get it started. Everybody, take care. As always, we'll see you tomorrow. I will be handling that wonderful Saturday slate for you guys. Going solo. You'll hear me in the morning recording it, but take care. Let's go take down some tournaments.